So you can like kind of see the shape and see through it. And this is
Or just the punctuation.
just the punctuations. Because I think the idea originates from when I was thinking that, when you read a foreign language, there's nothing you can read but the punctuation. Because everything else to you is just
true.
symbols.
Welcome to KUDOS AM PM, a podcast exploring the future and impact of design innovation as they intersect with art, business, and technology. I'm your host, John KUDOS. My guest today is Joyce Shi. How are you, Joyce?
Good.
Thank you for welcoming me in your workspace. Where are we?
We're in this really nice conference room where you can see a nice pitch of how the New York City behaves in the background. But yeah, this is where I live. This is where I work. I'm glad that we can get this room so you don't invade my private place where I have all the shitty things happening.
I wish I could see where you work. That would actually be.
Yeah, maybe. I have a lot of books. I have a big piano. And I have a really messy background because of the books. I have a really big bookshelf. So when I do Zoom calls, I always have to move myself towards a good angle so people can see my collection. But that's kind of like, a little bit of something I did.
Yeah. Speaking of books and camera angles, if you don't mind handing me that book over here. This is actually how I met you last, and in person actually. Yes. The first time I met you in person, because we've met online,
yes,
right? This is digital world nowadays. Mm-hmm. And this book I found at the Other Islands Book Fair at Pratt Institute, and I immediately fell in love with it. And that's why we're here today to talk about your practice as, I believe you call yourself a designer. And an artist?
Yes.
I'm not fully sure where the boundaries.
This is the thing about like doing design. I think like what I will call myself now is very different than what I will call myself like 10 years before. But yeah, I do a lot of book in a way that I think is in between book and publishing, because I think book and publishing are very different concepts. Book is kind of like the object, the manifestation of what I want to do. But publishing, as like how we met, is a communication. So I like seeing publication as not just, I want to make a beautiful book project to, I don't know, like show off my design skill, but also like, what do you really want to tell your readers? What do you think is really worthwhile of showing? So that's kind of like two things I'm trying to merge at the same time. But this one, as you are seeing here, is a very artistic project because it's very illustration and image based and also music inspired. So you'll see sometimes there's a personal aspect of the work, but at the same time, it needs to make sense as a small print volume project to be shared with not just me, but like 100 other people. So that's kind of like how I would define it.
Yeah, I do find the boundaries are not always clear, right? And because designers are makers, but most of the time designers make for clients, right? Make for other people. So this really strikes me as something that a designer would love to get their hands on, but also to make, right? So let's talk about this a little bit. It's BWV 988, and I looked this up. Actually, when I bought this book, I simply bought it because of the aesthetics. And then when I started flipping through it, at the end, you had mentioned, so let me get to that. This is actually the Goldberg variations, and then you had learned how to play this piece, which is composed by Johann Sebastian Bach.
Yeah.
Can you talk about how this book came about?
Yeah, so long story short, I've been classically trained as a pianist for more than 20 years, so that's much longer than I've been practicing design, because, as a kid, you don't know what graphic design is. You're just like, I make art, I like to draw, and that was kind of like my concept of visual world, like making something, drawing something, a lot of like image making. But at the same time, music has been such a big part of my journey. But like it also has changed a lot because when I was a kid, I remember it's such an Asian joke, but like all the kids had to learn the instrument. It just happens to be like I picked like a piano because it was the most expensive. It looks gorgeous. I was like, yeah, I want to play the piano. So I learned the piano. I didn't love it at first because it felt like a very competitive thing. Because a lot of times you have the pressure of doing audition, going to competition, and the kids are so talented. Like they do this thing from such a young age. And then it just feels like, oh, I kind of want to have to catch up. So I didn't really have the time to think about what is the music I want to do for a very long time until I didn't have the resource. So until I came here to New York in 2016, and all of a sudden I don't have an access to a piano. And I was like, oh, I want to practice piano. Where should I go? And I try to go to like the university dorm room where they have this tiny little sad piano just sitting in the corner that nobody's playing. And sometimes I'll even go to a music major and ask if I can use their piano, which they said no because I'm not allowed. Right. But like up until then, I was like just doing it unconsciously, like as something that I have to do. But then like now I don't have a piano anymore. I was like, okay, I really want to play something. And in a way that I can believe in myself, not just like, oh, I got to do this audition, I got to go to this competition, whatever. So I think Bach's music is like, during that time, it really grew on me as something that's really calming, sophisticated. It has a really nice structure. Also, there's just something that's so universal about his music that sometimes it feels like sacred, but also sometimes it feels like any mundane people, like anyone would be able to relate because just the emotional comfort it brings to someone. Mm-hmm. So that piece, the Goldberg variation, I think, like in my personal opinion, is one of the greatest compositions in human culture. Wow. It's something that has been there for like hundreds of years, yet it just keeps giving and inspiring people interpret it on different ways. So I learn it as a very humble gesture because I know this is a masterpiece. You don't want to just take it lightly. But also like after I learn it, actually halfway through, I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm not like doing a recording of it. I'm not like performing it anymore. I'm not like, looking for something to kind of like capsulate what I actually did during that time as a result. So I'm like, what if I make a book? And because I've always making books, because I'm a designer, and because music is such a big part of me that I don't tend to share with most people, I'm like, this is a unique opportunity for me to reflect on the piece, myself, my interpretation, but also just something that I think is universally like resonating. Like, as you said, a lot of people will pick up this book and like, oh, what is this? I love the paper. I love how it just feels like an ongoing illustration narrative. But some people also are like, I've never heard of Bach. I'm like, no way, you never heard of Bach? I'm like, okay, now you do. But so, like people get to this project and then they have different reactions towards it. So I think that's the beauty of interpreting something that's really, really important to you as a creator in your own way that's not sacrilegious, but also original to you.
According to Reddit, which is our dictionary nowadays, it's an impossible piece to play.
Yeah, like you mean technically or like just emotionally?
Well, I guess technically.
Yeah, it's a very demanding piece. And one reason is because I think when Bach wrote the piece, there was no modern piano. It was a different instrument, so you had to play like two rows. There are two rows of the keyboard, so there's 1 and 2. But then when you play things on modern piano, a lot of us you have to do this. Yeah. Like it's just like traffic jam. So that's like a thing that I was kind of struggling with when I was playing it, but also it really requires so much time and then just to think through the structure. Because like a thing about music in Bach's time is he didn't write, maybe he did, just we don't have it anymore, a lot of annotations on how to play it. So you don't have the tempo, you don't have the how you use the pedal. I mean, if it's a different instrument anyway, like a lot of the annotations probably wouldn't make sense. Right. So compared to a piece that modern composers write, you'll have much less information. So people argue about how you will actually have to play it all the time. So there's like people who are like, oh, you have to play it this way. And there's also people like, no, you can open for interpretation. It's not like the Bible that you can't, have any idea on how you want to play it at all. Yeah. So like I was kind of like in between, like, oh, should I play it like more safely, but also it's very technical demanding, or should I play it with just more free? So I think making it into a book is also a way for me to think without all the restrictions in terms of, oh, can I play it? How should I play it? Is it going to be sacrilegious if I play it this way? Yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, I've heard, I guess, musicians who play classical compositions, express the same issue where how do you express this differently, right? And I think this is actually a very interesting way for you to translate it visually. I think you've mentioned that it's architectural as well, right? The composition feels architectural, and I can see that in some of the visual interpretations in the book. It feels like it's really taking you to these forms. It continues from one page to another. So yeah, I really appreciated that, and I just felt like I discovered something quite different. Because it's not. It makes sense now because the approach is very different. Where it's coming from is very different.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. And I think like what you mentioned, the approach here is very important, because sometimes when you're working with something, like for example, when I'm working with a client project, but the methodology is really set, like, oh, you're commissioned to do this, so you're going to do this, a concept team brainstorming, you're going to bring this to your client, review, yada, yada, yada. It feels like you're trapping yourself into a pre-established mindset, like this has to be done in a certain way. Whereas when you do a slightly different project, like for this book or like my other books as well, like the process itself is very intertwined. So you don't have to be like, oh, how can I make sure this thing makes sense? Right. It naturally makes sense when you are as invested in the contents, like in the things that you're serving, as you're invested into the form itself. So I think in which way, like these things are not like separable. It's not like you have this, now I have to make a form, but they happen at the same time. Right. So I think that's kind of the beauty of having a methodology that's slightly different than just being like, okay, I'm gonna do 1, 2, 3, and I'm doing design to serve a goal that is like, you can't change. It's kind of the Bible. It's something that you have to obey.
Can you talk about your beginnings as a designer? Because I think you mentioned you're not from around here.
Yeah.
You relocated, and it was a big part of your transition in life, right? And losing access to piano. But yeah, tell me about how you started here.
Yeah, for sure. So like, as I kind of mentioned, I think as a kid, I didn't know what graphic design was until when I was applying to college, because then you have to do all the Common Apps things. You have to be like, oh, what major should I pick? Yeah. But up until then, like my idea of visual language, image making, it really transitioned from the process of, at first you're just learning drawing, like oil painting, watercolor, that really traditional techniques of how to produce an image, to something that's more digital. Because when I was like getting more into like art education, when I was doing high school, that kind of stuff, Adobe became a big thing. So the tools themselves kind of shaped my approach to making something visual. Like I'd started to do a lot of vector line work. Vector was like a bit new back then when I was, it's not something that you will learn in an art school. I would say, like, so like when I first got introduced to vector, I'm like, wow, such precision, such like amount of control that you can have over not just like pixels, but also like how you can just zoom in and make it like a perfect shape, for example. So I got into a lot of like abstract shape making. So, and that was, I think, a big part of my application material when I was applying to design schools. So when I was like in high school, I was kind of already having this idea of I want to do visual related things. But as I mentioned, like a lot of times people are just like, okay, so are you gonna do art? Or are you going to do design? Or what is the difference between design and art? Is there a difference between design and art? What is a design school versus an art school, right? And so when I did my application, I kind of have to like figure out what things are. And I remember I chose majors just purely by looking at the names, because I was really confused. Because there was like communication design, which is very much graphic design. There's also product design, but I was like, what is product design? There's also digital design and digital technology. But the work looks very similar to communication design, because digital design is a big part of both the programs. So I was like a little bit confused. I was like, okay, I need to do something to figure things out. Like I can't just assume that this is this and that is that, and I'll just go straight into it. So I actually came here. I went to Cooper Union to do a short-term graphic design program. And it was a really weird program where half the program is like drawing. So really traditional drawing, like still life drawing, that you have to be in the old building. It's almost like a clock tower and you get your hands really dirty with the charcoals and everything. But the other hand is like really modern graphic design. So it's a really interesting experience because on one day we'll spend like half the day in this really new building with really, really cold AC and staring at a laptop, working on posters, typography, and like after lunch, we'll do the traditional things. So I would say like looking back now, it was probably my first proper introduction to graphic design because you're learning the tools, you're learning the softwares, you're also learning how to construct a visual differently than drawing, which is very spontaneous to me. Like feels like you're just free flowing using your hand, but that way you need more precision. You need more like control of the overall system rather than, what you want to do in the moment. Right. So I think after that, I got more clear that I want to get into graphic design because I like the idea of how you're not just constructing one piece, but the potential of the piece to grow into multiple series or even a system or an experience that goes beyond one single touch point. So after that, I went to Parsons, I did my undergrad. I also was a printmaking minor. So I guess I keep some like really old-fashioned things going on like at all time. But then it's very much like growing from my self-interest of like, I'm such a visual person from the very beginning, but also honing the craft and understanding where particularly within the visual field I'm interested in, which is, I guess, the power of design to both make things, the idea of making, like you can construct things, but also make things a bit more less tangible. Like if you think about system, a brand system or like the show system, it's not like something that you can tell it's like, 5 paintings, but this thing is kind of the backbone that supports a lot of the visual things that's out there.
Let's talk about your practice as a designer. I think you have, I'm not sure about this actually. Do you work alone or do you have other people working with you or do you work for clients?
I guess we all have to work for clients at some point.
Well, not everyone.
I mean, like, ideally, yeah. But I think, like, at this point, because now we're doing this in 2026, it's a very interesting transaction period because first, like, of course, when I just graduated, I worked full-time. I had to get a sense of what the design world was like. But then after a few years, I decided to go freelance full-time. So I did that for, like, about a year and was working with a lot of, like, big ad agencies, brand agencies, design agencies that's like, Joyce, we need you to be on this branding project. So I'll maybe work with them for a few months and then go to something else. So I think after working with a bunch of clients and agencies during that time, I wanted to do something that feels a bit more like I can have them in control. Because the thing about working with clients full-time and freelance and part-time is I always feel like I'm commissioned to do something. Like the brief is already there. And you of course, you can decide if you want to take it or not, but most likely you'll have to do something that's kind of established. You know what it's kind of going to be like. You're just going to be doing it. So like after that, I was like, I need something more than just me, myself freelancing. So that's why I started my own design studio called Function Lab, which is pretty recent, I would say. This legal thing only exists for less than a year because then you have to do LLC and all that things, right? But then I think the actual practice have been going on for at least the past 6 months, which I would say is a pretty smooth start, like smoother than I would expect, because at first I was like, okay, most people do it when they have really established like client relationships, like after they work in the fields for like, I don't know, decades. But if I'm only doing this, like after I've been working for like 10 years, less than 10 years, is it gonna be actually successful? But I think like by putting my methodology out there, by actually saying that, this is how I work, this is what I believe in, this is the work I want to be constructing, and I want to be working with people like this and that. I think it attracts a lot of people who are like aligned with you, but just didn't know you exist. And then now they're like, that was a really refreshing perspective. I want to try working with her and see how things go. So I've been taking a lot of like project-based commissions, not really commissions. Sometimes I think it's more like a collaboration from smaller scale clients. Like there's a game company, there's some like fashion design studio and the architecture studio. So a lot of those people, I would say they are kind of creative people in some sense. And I tend to keep them like small to medium size, so it feels like more embedded, a lot less than like, oh, if Google is to commission me a big design project, then there's only so much thing.
Right, and the process will be very different, maybe less collaborative. You're talking about alignment, right? So you're talking about it is still commissioned in a way, right, in your practice, but then you can find better alignment in what you're interested in. Talk to me about the name.
The name of
Function Lab.
Oh, okay. So the thing about naming is when you want to do your name, there's like this conceptual aspect that you want to communicate through the name. There's also the housekeeping aspect, like which names are still available out like New York City.
Of course. That's the hard part.
But of course you can do different names. But so when I was thinking about names, most people are just like, oh yeah, you just use your name. Right, like your.
Oh, that's why I'm doing it.
That's what most people do. But I feel like every time I'm trying to put myself forward, like I am Joyce, look at me, I'm this really cool designer. I'm a really bit like, But I would rather the name to communicate something in terms of the method or the approach. So Function Lab, of course, is 2 words. Function means I want something. I think design should always be practical. If it has a purpose to serve, which 99% of the time it does, even if it's just to satisfy myself and do something I like to do, it still is a purpose, right? It needs to be like obeying certain rules in terms of, am I doing something to achieve the purpose, or am I doing something that's actually not related? I'm just like wanting to do something fancy, design for the sake of design. So that's not something I want to do. I don't want this to be ornamental. I don't want this to be decorative. I think it should always make sense. But lab is also, I think, a place where experiments happen. So that's kind of like echoing with the approach of how I work, and also like the territories, how you operate. Because a lot of times smaller design studios will be like, oh, we do specific kinds of design for specific kinds of market. And that's how they like specialize themselves, which makes sense as a strategy. But for me, what's more interesting is how can I use this very concept-driven approach to all kinds of design, like things I have done, like branding, campaign, book design, website, whatever, and things maybe I have never done. So how can we use this creative power to do things that are not yet defined? So I think that's where the lab part comes from. And on my website, I actually made a tab called Lab, and you can just see a bunch of random images floating. And that's kind of my own creative playground of things that's just like, we don't just do commission work, because even though you're like, as a studio, you have to make yourself a living. You have to get paid, you have to do client work. But at the same time, is there anything we can do that is empowering designers' role in a way that like, here's what designers want to do and here's how we do it, rather than we always have to wait until someone to tell us what to do almost. So.
Almost, yeah. But in a way, I think you're already on the right track in your journey in finding alignment to what you enjoy. You're actually creating things that you like or love, and in a way, you're attracting the right types of client.
Yeah, I think it's a mutual process and something that you have to like behold almost, because sometimes you're like, I want to take this because it's good money and it feels like an easy job to do. It's not going to go wrong. Like, are you going to take it or not? Because everything, as I think of it right now, unless you have nothing going on, of course, you should take it. But everything is kind of like an opportunity cost. Sometimes you'll do something that feels easy and feels more familiar, but doesn't feel true to yourself. And then at this time, I'll be like, oh, things are not going right. I think I need to make a change so that in the long term, I can like gradually build a portfolio of work that represents who I am and what I think things should kind of like perform, rather than, oh, people make me do this. This is not what I want to do. This is really who I am. But then all people see is the portfolio of the work that you actually have done. Right. So I think there was a lot of like times where I have to choose between, do I work with this big tech company that's, they're going to pay you well, but it's going to be what it is what it is. Or do you want to take a chance to do something that is a little bit less defined? You don't really know where it's going to go, but I think those are the moments, of course, like based on the respect that you have for your own work, and also being responsible for your agency, for the team, if you have a team to work with. Then on top of that, how can we always push ourselves to make something that's a bit more authentic and a bit more true to what we think the society or the community needs more, like working with even pro bono work and nonprofits and organizations that are generally not paying you guys well. But that's exactly why they don't have really, the design resources for most of the time to do work, because it's not really the sexy part of the work that it's so celebrated among designers.
Let's go back and talk about your, I guess, your role as a book designer, right? On your website, you actually have a publishing practice as well. Can we talk about that?
Yeah. So the publishing practice is called JXS Press. I don't remember how the name came to be because it's been so long. I guess the name changed a few times throughout the years, but it is what it is now. So JXS Press, as I sort of like mentioned, it's in between design and publishing. So there are two aspects of the work that I really want to explore. The first is, of course, book as a tangible medium, especially now, like graphic designers, as we are so familiar with designing for brands and screens and websites, interactions, motions. There's less and less designers doing tangible things, I feel like. So this aspect of what is something that we really can't achieve through a screen, which is a lot if you think about it. We live in this tangible world. We're human beings. We need to touch, we need to smell, we need to interact with physical objects. This aspect of how a book can become a time-based medium, and also an interactive object, and also even like a condensed architecture. Because I think the thing about book and architecture is you experience the different multitudes of it. You sometimes see the spine, sometimes see the cover, you interact with the page, you can smell it, you can hold it, you can, make that part of your collection. So I think there's something about living with this object that is just so long-term and so layer that you can't really just make it flat on a screen. So that's one part. The second part, I think, which is also more interesting to me, is the designer's role as an artist, author, editor, publisher, whatever. Because I think we've been talking about how designers, we always get commissioned to do something, and then you're like, oh, that's interesting, I can do it. But if you think about what is something we really want to do, we don't often have the leisure of doing, or we're not always encouraged to, unless you're at design schools, where sometimes at least the design school I went to, it was very encouraging in terms of, oh, here's a really broad brief, maybe for example time and calendar, and you can make a calendar of any sort, of anything that you want, any place, any memories, any form, and it's really open-ended. So I think that also kind of cultivate this idea of thinking about what I want to do versus thinking of design as doing things for others from the very beginning. So this practice kind of started during the student phase when I was doing a lot of school projects, because that feels natural. You have to make a book anyway because it's a job as a student.
That's the job.
Yeah. But even after graduating, the more I do client work, the more I'm but nobody cares about what designers think. Maybe they do, but it's definitely, I see so many people, especially when I mentor design students or when I teach, they have so many things that they want to do, but they're just my client didn't ask for this. I'm you can do this anyway.
Right.
So this idea of how we can kind of have different characters during a creative process, that you don't always have to be the service provider. And I think that's also kind of what shapes the entire methodology and approach to most of my book design.
In fact, that maybe is fulfilling or solve the problem of how we differentiate as designers. Right? Every one of us have something to bring to the table that's of interest. And then you, with your background as a musician, but also obsessed with visual and tactile, right? So I think that makes who you are. And then, I think certain clients will be more attracted to designers who have this kind of affinities.
Yeah. Because it's interesting, because sometimes when I get certain projects, they're oh, Joyce, I saw this book, this particular book that you make, not just a collection of the book, but maybe, for example, they saw the Bach project I made, and I'm so into this, and can we collaborate on some projects? You can be totally authentic to who you are, and we love this for you, let's just do something together. So it almost feels like a commission to an artist, to some sense. Like, you know, it's not just like generic, oh, they need a random logo provider, you just happen to be there. You know that those people came to you because of how you work and that this particular visual vocabulary that you produce. So I think, yeah, to some extent, it's helpful for me to establish who I am, like my personal branding, even my studio, and attract people who are kind of like more tend to agree with you more. Not saying that we never have disagreement, but I think we're aligned on a certain level that makes things much easier. So I think that's a gift. But also I do recognize it's a privilege to be in a position who is able to produce so much like self-initiative work, because like this is because how I was educated as a designer at the first, but also you got to put all the time and the money into those projects that are really bad business decisions.
Yeah.
People.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I also often think about, you know, our profession as designers as being privileged, right?
Yeah.
Because we know how to do things that many don't, and then we can actually apply our skill to a lot of other things, like starting a business, starting your own publishing business, right? So let's talk about this. How long have you been publishing? And how was it when you started, and how is it now?
So I think when I first started it, like in record, I say this publishing practice started in 2016, but actually an earlier version of that started much earlier, I think 2012, something like that. So that was more than 10 years ago. And I think, at the time it was emerging. I wasn't really aware why I wanted to do this. It was just a natural urge. I wanted to do books. I love books, and I want to make like art with my friends who, at the time, a lot of those friends became illustrator, like professional illustrator, but like we're all doing artwork, visual work of some sort. But I think looking back now, 2012 or early 2010 was a time where fanzine culture became a big thing in China. And as you may be aware, like in China, publishing is a very like restricted area. There's no such thing. There is such thing as self-publishing.
Because of the government oversight?
Yes, and then you can't really buy ISBN unless you're like a publisher.
Oh, interesting.
So the way of, say, if you're an artist, you want to get your work published, the only way pretty much is through a publisher. So you have to pitch your work to them and they'll publish your work about you. But you don't really get paid. It's more because, oh, I get recognized. It's like a sense of authority. It's like endorsing the work. It's worth being published. So this idea of you can publish your own work was something that's really near to me. As a very young, I was a teenager at the time. I was like, oh yeah, we make art. We can publish our own books. That's nice. I want to do it. So after we started doing this, like some of those are really collaborative projects. We'll come together, be like, oh, this idea or this something is something that we really like. I did a book about like prehistoric creatures, for example, those animals that died, basically. So extinct animals.
Who knows, in the future they may come back.
I hope. And we may also become extinct, and they will. You never know. But like we did a book about that. We also did a book on Yggdrasil, so like the tree and the methodology, the tree of the world. It's some really random things. And you would probably be like, why would you decide to do something like that? But it was like a really niche hobby, like something that people were so interested in. And then I was like, oh, I want to do this. And some people were like, I also want to do this. So it was a very like self-initiative process of like, we just all wanted to make books, tangible work that we can print our work as part of the book and then share it with among other people. So when I started doing this, I felt like there was a sense of you're not like being defined as like, oh, a successful artist who can finally publish their work through a publisher, but you're kind of just doing this like in a way that you don't have to go through other people's method. You're just like, yeah, sure, we can do this. Why not? So I think that was a big part of why the way I saw this publishing practice was never just about book, but also publishing. How it first was even a symbol of authority that you have to get approved to get published, and you can never do this yourself. You don't have the power to do this yourself. And then you're like, okay, now I run like this independent publishing practice. I can do work that I care about. I can also collaborate with people that I think they're worth being seen. I can do all kinds of things. So it's, to some extent, it's a distribution of power. It's a distribution of what you think the world hasn't seen, that there's a place for it, but also in a very humble way, because the way I run it is not like I'm printing 2,000 copies. I can never afford printing 2,000 copies.
Well, what's your typical run for the books you publish?
About 100 to 200, I'll say. Like even 200 is a lot because of the very thin margin this projects usually come with, because the production cost, shipping costs, those hard costs you can just not avoid. Yeah. And if you want to sell more, you have to work with a distributor that takes somewhere between like 30% to 60% of the cut. Yeah. So that makes, I think, the independent publishing work itself has a humble nature, because you're not making money. It's bad business projects. People would discourage you from doing this unless you see this as pure investment.
Yep, you're here and you're doing that.
Yeah, and then I'm losing money doing it. But like I think that's exactly the reason why people know that you're doing this out of like authentic like heart, like you want to do this, not like I'm doing this for money. I
feel like most of the people I met at other islands book fair are doing exactly what you're doing. It's sort of a I want to do this. I love this topic. I love this format. Just keep doing it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the beauty of independent publishing. No matter what you do, some people do more artistic things, some people do more political things, some people do something in between, and then they run this more like a platform. I do know a lot of designer friends who keep doing this, which we have mutual respect for each other, because we know it's not an easy thing to do. Right. With every project, you are basically like setting aside amount of money that you're like, okay, I'm kind of just assuming it's never gonna like break even. And I'm just losing the money by doing this project, but I'm still like okay with doing it. It's almost like you bought a really expensive piece of jewelry, or you miss a chance to go to a nice trip, but still I would prefer making that money into producing a book rather than doing other things, because this is what we're passionate about. But that's exactly the reason why I said this is a privilege, because I do know most people are not even able to get the money to produce those books. Of course, you can do like smaller scale things like zines and prints, but making book is becoming much, much more difficult nowadays. And all the logistics and how you're going to store it, if you're emerging, how you're going to sell it, right? So like everything like combined, I think it also puts more responsibility on those of us who are doing such things, that you can't just think of it as like a selfish thing. Like I'm doing prints of like, say, my selfie that doesn't mean nothing to people. I mean, sure, you can do it, but I'm hoping there's more thoughtful, meaningful conversation that can happen through these.
Right. You really think about what you're doing as a platform in a way, right? A platform to connect with like-minded people. Yeah. I love that. I mean, that's sort of how I do things myself. It's not always, well, most of the time it's not about the money. It's actually more about whether can I ask myself, can I turn this into something interesting? Can I actually like this when I finish the project, right? So, and like you said, it's not, most of the time that's, it's hard to get there when you are commissioned to do that work. But it really depends who's commissioning that work, right? Because once you find the right partner, and it becomes a really beautiful sort of relationship to create something nice together.
Yeah, for sure. I think this client aspect of it, like we kind of already discussed, you kind of have to already establish who you are and attract the right people. But at the same time, running a business, even just running your solo practice as a freelance designer, for example, it's always a decision between sometimes I'll work for the money, sometimes I'll work for the portfolio, sometimes I'll work for like feeling good about the work that I create. Sometimes like I will do pro bono work in between two big like tech company projects, so that I feel like I'm contributing to society in some sort of meaningful way, rather than just creating another banner ad for. I'm not going to name the brand.
Everybody needs banner ads.
Tell me about it, banner ads.
So let's talk about really amazing to see how many of these books you've managed to publish. I mean, every one of them, I can imagine the time that it took, to think about how you came up with the idea, to conceptualize, even finding the right material, and copywriting as well, right? You consider yourself an editor and an author, right? So in doing so, you retain control in the expression of these books, right? And I really love that aspect about your work. What's next for you? What's exciting?
You might know of this project called Typography in New York City, which we have this right here, the second volume. So this thing kind of documents my journey as a designer when I first came here till now, which is already 10 years. Oh my God, 10 years. Can you imagine that? Like technically I'm a New Yorker now. But yeah.
I heard it takes longer than 10 to
really? Like, I don't have to be. Anyways, so this is a project that I usually, well, briefly, I just take my phone, I go out there, because I'm a very indoor person. I hate going out, I hate being outside. But every time I do, I make sure I take some pictures of typography that I see. Not necessarily nicely designed type, but just this idea of, oh, that was kind of interesting. Oh, look at what that person's wearing. That kind of moments where you'd be like, it's human beings living in the world, not just like a nice curated type that doesn't say any, like Laura Epson. Right. So I like those moments when people are using typography to express who they are. Like even a lot of those are not designed by designers, just random banners, like things that say, oh, no bills, no pose, like don't post bills, or like don't pee, don't make your dog pee, your dog can't pee.
It's almost an invitation.
Yeah, like all the signs that you see, all the posters, it was just like such a vivid visual culture. In a way that's not judged by, is the design good, or is the kerning right, or does this look optically, correct? Not in that sense, but you can just tell how people are just being themselves. New Yorkers being themselves, which I love. So I published the one in 2021. Ever since then, I had a lot of conversation when I go to book fairs, and people are like, oh, you should go there, you should go that, you should do this, this, and that. And we've been talking so much about this project because people can relate to this thing so much. And then I decided to do two, which was published in 2024. So it's kind of like every 2 to 3 years, I publish one issue, which was not the intent. Because knowing that I only have so much time and money to produce books, I don't usually want to make things that feels repetitive. But that project felt different because I think every issue, I'm not just enlarging the volume or doing a slightly fancier cover or something. It actually feels the approach is also changing. Like through the conversations I've been having with my readers, also like every time I go out, I see something different that maybe like stimulates and inspired me to do something different. So that said, 2026, I think this summer probably, depends on when the production is gonna be done, I'm gonna be launching 3. And that's also gonna be 10th anniversary for the project and myself to be in New York. So I'm gonna make something very special. That is something to be coming. And there's another thing called letter size essay, which is pretty self-explanatory, like I print essay on a letter size paper. But that's because, as you mentioned, like sometimes when we write as designers, we're like, oh, but I'm not trained to write a book. I'm not really trained to write like academic writing. So a lot of designers feel discouraged from writing because we don't properly know how to do it. So letter size essay is something that I started in 2024 as well. That like every time I go to a book fair, every time I have an occasion to publish something, I print like a typesetted poster on one side, and on the side I have like a really nice and short article or like essay or journal, whatever you want to call it, usually about design, art, and creativity and our like industry, but also about something else. So that thing, I think very soon is gonna reach its 10th volume. So another 10. Wow. So we've been publishing a lot of writings. Yes. So when we reach 10, there's going to be something special coming out as well. So that's kind of the 2 projects I have in mind.
Can't wait for it. I can include a link to that.
Yeah, everything's open.
Right there below. So yes, but yeah, this is so exciting. I mean, I think you started on this journey years ago, but it has evolved, but it feels like you've been very consistent in having it your way. And I think that's an attitude that I feel like most designers need to aspire to. I think we don't have to live by the rules that, we can only do what the clients allow us to do.
And I think it's an art of balance. So like, of course, there are sometimes you're like, the client said this, I'm just going to do it. But like, this is actually the question I get asked a lot, especially like ever since I started like mentoring and teaching. A lot of those mentees and students I have are like still going like to undergrad. And they're like, oh, when I graduate, first I have to pay the rent, right? I have to afford my bills. I have to be able to live in the city. But also I want to do something nice. I want to invest in my career. I want to go to a pretty established, respected studio and do some work that actually means something to the industry, not just like random production design work. At the same time, they're also like, oh yeah, but that doesn't pay me well. But also I have to figure out my visa situation. I want to win awards. I want to do this, this, and that. There's so many things you want to do. And the reality is you can never find like one perfect project that does them all.
Right.
So the tactic is always do something that does this and do something else that does that. So like it becomes like
picture.
Yeah, like for example, like I did this for a war so I can apply for my green card. Great, good for you. Right. I got this so that I can pay for my next month rent. Good for you. Right. I got this because I actually want to help those non-profit organizations. Good for you. So it's not always like consistent in terms of every single project is the same, but like having the responsibility to take care of yourself first and then knowing what's the priority is. So that's kind of like the way at least I try to see it. Unless there's no way to survive, there's like no dead end.
Yeah, knowing where to put your efforts and making sure that, you know, they count towards the final goal, right?
Yeah.
With that, I want to thank you for being on this conversation with me.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed this. Thank you for listening. If you feel like you learned a lot from this, if you feel like you know someone I should be talking to, let me know. And please like, subscribe. I'll see you next time.